Insulated screeds are the best way to heat the floors in your building. But there are a few really common mistakes which can derail the whole project, which can end up in you having to either rip up your whole floor or put up with cracked tiles or a variety of other problems. So let me tell you a little bit of a story about a phone call I had recently and the 4 most common mistakes and how to avoid them. So a few weeks ago, our structural engineer called me, and he's a guy that we've known for a long time, but actually haven't done any projects with him. But he was asking some really detailed questions about heated insulated screeds. And after a while, I got really curious and I started asking, is there something specific that you need help with, or, what's up with all the really detailed questions? And then he started explaining that he had just finished a project with a builder and another floor heating installer, where they had installed the screed and everything seemed okay, but then a little bit after it had been turned on, they started noticing cracks through all of the house. They noticed that where these cracks were, that there were some bits of the screed were higher than other bits, so there was a vertical difference. They noticed that in some parts the floor sounded drummy when you walked all over it. And so he was really curious about why or how these problems can come about and how best to avoid them or even fix them. Now, unfortunately, I had to tell him you can't really fix them unless you pull up the whole floor. But through our conversation, I realized that they had most likely made the 4 most common mistakes. So let me tell you a little bit about them and how best to avoid them. So mistake number 1 is lack of expansion joints. So expansion joints allow the screed, which is continually heating up a little bit and expanding a little bit and then cooling down and contracting, and it just heats up, expands and cools down and contracts all the time up. And it's not a huge amount, it's not centimeters, we're talking millimeters. But this needs to be allowed for, especially in narrow passages or through doorways like we have here. These are the weakest bits of the screed. And if you don't allow for any movement, and if you don't allow each section of screed to move independently, then you will get cracks all the way through the screed visible onto your floor finish. So number 1 is make sure you have enough expansion joints and that they are constructed correctly to allow independent movement of each section of screed. Number 2 is a lack of perimeter insulation. Now, the perimeter insulation not only stops heat losses from the side of the screed, but it also allows, again, for this thermal expansion and contraction of the screed as it heats up and cools down. And so what happens is, if you don't allow for this foam, perimeter foam, which has a little bit of give in it, which allows the screed to expand into it, what happens is the screed will still try and expand because you can't stop that, but it has nowhere to go. So what will actually happen is it can buckle or crack in some weak spots. So problem number 2 is not allowing for the perimeter expansion strip. Mistake number 3. That's where the subfloor surface is not prepared well enough. And that can be either, let's say, there's a concrete slab below and it's not finished nice and smooth and prepared. There's, say, bulges in there or rough parts. What happens then is that the insulation isn't in complete contact with the subfloor below, and so there's gaps and air pockets, and where there's basically an air gap between the screed and the insulation and the subfloor. And what happens then is that when you walk over it or when you tap on it, it sounds drummy, and obviously nobody wants that. That's really annoying. So the subfloor should always be smooth, clean, well prepared, and definitely well swept or vacuumed or clean so that there's no sand or debris there, which can also cause this drumming effect. And mistake number 4 is where the thermal insulation, which covers the floor, is not included everywhere. So often where there's built-in furniture, you might see some installers, they'll leave out the thermal insulation in those parts. And sure, it'll save them a little bit of money and a little bit of time, but this creates a problem for you in the future because, first of all, you have energy leakage through the screed, through the side of the screed into the structure below where it's not insulated. And second of all, you can develop cracks in the floor finish there where you have the change from the insulated floor to the uninsulated floor. And that's because with the thermal insulation, it can compress a little bit. It has a little bit of give. So when you apply a load or some weight to it, it might depress or compress by 0.5 millimetre, 1 millimetre. It depends on the quality of the insulation and the thickness, but it will compress a little bit. Now, if you apply that load as well on the uninsulated part, then there's no give there. It's the screed is sitting directly on top of a concrete slab. So if you apply it on where it changes from insulated to uninsulated, you have some that will compress, some that won't. And that means that you'll develop a crack in that spot. At Euroheat, we've been designing and installing insulated screed systems for almost 30 years. So if you would like some expert advice or some help with your project, go to our website, find our email address, and send through information about your project, your ideas, and your plans, including your sections, elevations, and the more information, the better. And then we'll get back to you with how and if we can best help you.